Hello and welcome to the Angry Ewok channel. Today we'll be discussing the Grand Army of the Republic in Star Wars Armada. So the intent of this video is not to tell you this is how you should run clones, just to give you some thoughts of mine on some good things that I've seen from clones, some bad things I've seen from clones, some weaknesses, and just some general thoughts on how the different chassis differ from each other and what kind of approaches you can take. And this is all meant to be speculation. It's colored with some experience, but honestly, as the game evolves, all this can change. Also, I think that the Acclamator in particular suffers from the syndrome of being the big ship or the centerpiece of the Grand Army of the Republic's fleet right now, when it's really not designed to be any more than the Vic 1 or the Vic 2 is designed to be the centerpiece of the Imperial fleet. You don't see Imperial fleets built around Victory class Star Destroyers. They're too slow, their defensive suite is not robust enough, and they just don't fit the bill. But you will occasionally see them in a supporting role, supporting an Onager, supporting a Star Destroyer, and I think that that's what the Acclamator will be, but right now it's being forced to function as the flagship, as the big teeth of the clone fleet, and it kind of has a hard time doing that. But we'll get into that later. Here are the two chassis available to the clones right now. The Acclamator class medium base ship and the Consular class small base ship. And you'll notice right away just the dice orientation, and once you see the actual ship on the table, you'll see the arcs of the Acclamator, and it's very similar to a Vic. It's got a very wide front arc and is meant to try to put that arc on multiple targets or utilize that big front arc to hit something very hard. So it wants to fly directly towards the enemy. Also, you have the Consular class, which is a very well-rounded, especially the C-70, got a well-rounded dice allocation, so it can double arc really well. It can continue to skirmish from the side, so it's very similar to a CR-90. And then you got the Consular armored cruiser. It's kind of similar to like a Raider or a Hammerhead, or possibly even like a CR-90B. So if you think of them in that kind of way, you'll kind of be in the ballpark. I really believe. So it's odd because it looks like trying to fly a fleet that's comprised of Victory Star Destroyers and CR-90s. You got Rebel smalls mixed with Imperial mediums, and if you can imagine trying to make those two gel together, that's what you're trying to do when you're playing clones. The Acclamator I and the Acclamator II are very similar in a lot of ways, so we're going to basically pull out and highlight the differences here. And we're going to start with the Acclamator I. The Acclamator I's big difference from the Acclamator II is the fact that it has two offensive retrofit slots, and you'll see an Acclamator on the left, and then you'll see all of the potential options that you can put in that offensive retrofit slot. And you'll notice that most of these slots are fighter squadron oriented upgrades. Not all of them, but most of them. You know, things like hyperspace rings, advanced transponder net, boosted comms, expanded hangar base, reserved hangar decks, and rapid launch base. All of those deal and lend themselves to squadrons. And so being able to take any two of these really accentuates that role, and that obviously makes the Acclamator I a carrier, a natural born carrier. What you're giving up is the access to the defensive retrofit slot, which is something that the Acclamator II has. So you're taking something very similar to, say, a Vic 1. It's a squad pusher with Squadron 3, and it'll usually take like boosted comms or maybe expanded hangar bays. This can do both. You can do something like boosted and expanded, so that you can, with one squadron command, push 4 squadrons and do that at long range. Also, there's a chance to do something interesting with advanced transponder net, say if you're using a lot of Y-wings or hyperspace rings, which we'll get to in a minute, because I think it's kind of a defining characteristic of clones, one of their things that they have the ability to do that no other faction can do, and we'll come back to that. But with their dice loadout of 3 reds and 2 blacks out the front, and 2 reds and 1 black on the sides, not a very strong side arc. So you're really not getting a whole lot out of that double arc, and it's hard to line up that double arc because the front is so large. So again, treating it like a Vic, and there's not any blue dice to add to your shots, so there's really no reason to take disposable capacitors. So that kind of eliminates that from the running. So you might put LTTs on this to get some reroll consistency with your red dice, both on your regular shots and on your salvos, and your flak option is pretty good too. It has 2 black dice flak, which is very good, very strong, but it is short ranged, and that might be kind of an issue sometimes. But between the black dice flak and the LTT option, you can produce 4 blacks at a time in anti-squadron shot if you need to, which can be pretty effective if you need to hurt generics, like say for example an enemy Aether Sprite. So Acclamator I, a good little pocket carrier. I think it will continue to be a carrier as the clone faction gets more things, just because of how effective it is at bringing 2 offensive retrofits, and it'll probably find itself sitting in the back, slow rolling, taking pot shots, and pushing 4 squadrons a turn. It might even be used as a nice hyperspace rings platform, something where you could do expanded hangar bays, hyperspace rings, and then which increases your squadron value from 3 to 4, and then so you can use hyperspace rings to deploy 4 squadrons forward. So that's my take on Acclamator I's. Something that you're seeing a lot of right now to kind of double down on this carrier role is the Navuta B title, and you can see the wording on the screen. I think that this title may give the Acclamator, it's strong enough and well pointed enough that I think you will see the Acclamator played even beyond this Wave 0 state, because the functionality that it gives to generic squadrons. It gives the Acclamator I especially a kind of a niche special effect that any other ship that can just push 4 squadrons can't have. So between the ability to take a weapons team slot, which gives you access to flight controllers, and the ability to take the Navuta B title, I think those 2 things together, combined with the double offensive retrofit slot, will continue to make the Acclamator I a good choice going forward, especially if you have another big bruiser like a Venator or some other larger combat ship that can protect its weaker sides and prevent it from being the focus of the enemy attack. Where the Acclamator I is defined by its offensive retrofits, the Acclamator II doesn't have access to an offensive retrofit. That makes it a lot less effective as a carrier, simply because it can't take boosted comms, it can't take expanded hangar bays, those things that make it more prone to commanding squadrons. However, for the additional 5 points that you pay, you're adding a blue dice to the front arc, and you are changing a black dice from the back arc to a blue dice, which is going to increase the effectiveness of your salvo shot, because a lot more times you're going to be getting 2 dice coming back with a salvo. So that token is somewhat more valuable, just because it'll probably be producing 2 dice for you offensively in more cases due to range. And you also have access to the defensive retrofit slot, which you'll see the defensive retrofit options. Most people are familiar with ECM, which has been changed somewhat. Reactive gunnery is not really as exciting on something that already has a salvo, but early warning systems is good. Reinforced blast doors is good. Advanced projectors, on a 1 redirect ship, I don't know. But if you're taking an Acclamator II, the reason you're taking it is because you want the additional dice up front, you want the better salvo, you want access to and you should have a plan for utilizing this defensive retrofit slot. Because if you're not taking it for those reasons, you're probably better off just taking an Acclamator I, because it's cheaper, does about the same thing, and you're not putting as many points into it. So if you're doing that, and we'll go into some ways that you can apply that. If you're taking an Acclamator II, it's not because it's a good carrier, because if you wanted a carrier, you'd have gone with an Acclamator I. So if you're taking an Acclamator II, you need to be doing things to utilize the defensive retrofit slot, and you're probably taking it as a combat ship. And so if you're using it as a combat ship, and you look at it and you realize that its side arcs are not great, and it doesn't turn well enough to be a great double arcer, you're going to be wanting to utilize that big front arc. So gunnery teams, I think, is going to be one of the most common upgrades on this ship just because of, you're doubling down on the thing that's its main strength. It gets an additional blue dice. If you use gunnery teams, it's kind of like shooting 2 extra blue dice. You're going to want to put a turbo laser upgrade of some kind to increase that effectiveness to, again, get your money's worth out of that big, heavy shot off the front. LTTs can do this. XI7s can be good in this role. Anything that you get that adds value to the shot. Some new things that clones have is access to clone gunners and swivel mounted batteries. These are faction specific to Clone Wars factions in the case of swivel mounted batteries, and faction locked to Grand Army of the Republic in the case of clone gunners. And clone gunners, I think, is an interesting case. I don't know if it's not going to be as good as gunnery teams, just because 2 shots is going to be better in most cases, and you're still paying the same concentrate fire command, and you also have the side stipulation that you have to have another ship with a concentrate fire token at range 5 of the defender to trigger this. So the amount of things that you have to have working are kind of a lot. And if you fight somebody that's got ECM and you go to all this trouble to line up this one big shot, and you blow your X-Racks and you force the accuracy to block the brace, and you think, yeah, I'm about to do 9-10 damage, and they ECM you, all of your planning and situating has been nullified by a card that, even though it's been changed, is still very valuable and probably going to show up in a lot of lists, just because being able to cut someone's burst damage in half is still one of the best things in the game. So we'll go on to some loadouts. When list building, you always need to have a plan for what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish that, and then you try to build everything around that. And so the Acclamator I that you see on the top is a carrier. It's designed to support a squadron-oriented fleet, and it's got things that make that very effective. It's got Navuta B, it's got flight controllers, it's got boosted comms, expanded hangar bays. You'll also notice I have external racks comboed with LTTs on both of these ships, because I think it's a very strong combination, because it can either boost offense for a ship shot, or it can be used as part of an LTT shot if the LTT shot, if when you're using LTTs to only attack a single squadron and add 2 dice of any color, you can add these 2 black dice to the shot if the shot happens at close range. You can't do this way far out, but sometimes that's useful. Sometimes being able to roll the 2 black dice off the Acclamator and then pop your LTTs to get 2 more black dice against that one single squadron. If you flub the roll and you really need to die, you pop your X-Racks and then add 2 more. And surely to goodness, with 6 black dice, if it's a generic, it's going to take, at least 4, so you can kill an Aether Sprite, or you can kill a Hyena Bomber or something like that with pretty good reliability. Also, the external racks can be used on any arc, so if and when you fly by somebody and they come curling into your side, you have a little more offense to just to burst in that direction, because you're really probably not going to get a lot of black dice shots. I would not put APTs, I would not put ACMs on these, just because they're not fast enough. They're not turning. They don't fly well enough to consistently keep good black dice shots on target. But that's your carrier archetype Acclamator I, and then bottom you see your combat ship Acclamator II with gunnery teams, with ECMs, again with the X-Racks and the LTTs combo together, just because of the flexibility of that combination. And you'll see Clone Navigation Officer. We'll get to him a little more in the future. I think he's just a placeholder. There's anything you want can go in that officer slot, but the reason I have him here is because a lot of the times when you're playing, especially Clone Wars on Clone Wars right now, you're seeing Dooku, and Dooku will try to shut down your commands with raid, and the ability to bounce tokens back and forth with Clone Navigation Officer, which we'll explain a little more in detail in the future, is really good for neutralizing his crippling raid abilities. So, if you're taking Acclamators, I strongly advise that you use Bail Organa in your fleet if they're the focus, and the reason for that is because the top Acclamator, Acclamator I, is designated as a squad pusher. It's going to be doing a lot of squadron dials. The bottom ship is going to be doing a lot of concentrate fire dials to fuel gunnery teams. So when they're doing those, they're not going to be able to spend a lot of time navving or repairing, and so the ability to give them those dials on command when they need them is a big deal, because these ships are very much single roll ships and they don't drive well. With one click at any speed, that additional click of yaw can be all the difference for these. So I strongly advise, if you're Bale heavy, if you're an Acclamator heavy fleet, to look strongly at using Bale. Moving on to the Consular, these ships have two distinct roles as well. You have one that's short range and can take an ordnance slot. It can be used as a raider. It turns very well, goes to speed 4, has good arcs, easy to double arc with. It could function as a raider, though I'm not seeing it used a lot in that way. Usually the Consular armed cruiser is being used as a token pusher and as a support ship, almost as if it were an expensive flotilla analog. A lot of times you're seeing it with the Radiant 7 title to be able to get some sort of fleet support option. A lot of times I like to run them or see them with clone navigation officers because of its ability to give tokens to other ships in the fleet. So this kind of hits it from both ends. It can be you could do something like CommsNet and clone navigation officer, so then you can reveal a dial. Let's say, for example, you reveal a navigate dial. You can reveal a navigate dial, tap clone navigation officers to give another ship a distance 5 a navigate token, and then you can take that navigate dial as a token and then use CommsNet to sling that token to a whole different ship. So you can basically do 2 tokens worth of stuff as long as you can fuel clone navigation officer. You know, it can be used other ways. You can put munition supply on it. I'm not saying that this Consular armed cruiser only functions as a token slinger, but that's usually the role that we see it in, or we see it loaded up with external racks and trying to send it in there like a missile to basically blow something up like a raider would. The Charger C-70 is probably my favorite clone ship, and it's basically a clone CR-90. It's got good long-range firepower at red range, and you usually combo it with LTTs so you can re-roll those dice and make it more consistent. You don't really want to go with TRCs here like you would on a CR-90 because it only has 1 evade, and a lot of times it's going to need that evade because that's one of the only ways that you can neutralize damage at long range with it, unless you're taking, you know, Obi-Wan, which we'll get to maybe. But the best use of this guy is to just set up a double arc at long range and fire 2 red dice out the front with a reroll, 2 dice out the front side with a reroll, and try to get 2 and 2. You know, 2 small packets of damage into the same facing if you can, that are, you know, almost frustratingly useless to brace, but they're still going to add up. And also, interestingly, they have a offensive retrofit slot, which conveniently will fit with reserve hangar decks. I think one of the best ways to run these guys is with reserve hangar decks and LTTs. That makes them fairly cheap. That's 55 points for something that can then help your fighter screen. If you're playing clones, you're probably going to take a V19 Torrent or 2 somewhere. And so they have Swarm, they're generics, so reserve hangar decks triggers against them, triggers on them, and can resurrect some of your V19 Torrents. Because these guys are not good squad pushers. They can only push 1 squad. However, they can contribute to the air war, and for a low cost of 3 points on a ship that doesn't really want to use that offensive retrofit slot for a whole lot else, I think it's a really good buy. So that's the way they typically function. They're just cheap, fast moving, speed 4, very maneuverable fire support. The swift return title is amazingly good at getting, you know, adding to that maneuver dial. But you'll see a lot of these in clone fleets just to fill out activations, but they are also very good at producing damage in small packets, small consistent packets at long range, where they don't really have to risk themselves too much because they don't want to get in the fight. Because just like CR-90s, they don't have a brace token, and they only have 1 evade, so they're even less resistant to long range shooting even. These are some typical builds that I like to use with both of these ships. The Consular class armed cruiser, I've got Radiant 7, which gives me access to a fleet support slot, taking a CommsNet. I got Clone Navigation Officer, and so like we discussed previously, you can sling 2 tokens with this. It's not a useless ship. It's got decent dice, and if you hang back with it, it can pounce late and do a lot of damage for you. But it's predominantly, clones don't have flotillas, but this is filling that role. And it does the job of 2 flotillas in a lot of cases. It's kind of like 2 ComSnet flotillas for the 2 rounds that you can use Clone Navigation Officer, because you'll use him, refresh him with a token, use him again, and then if you want to refresh him again, you're going to have to spend a token that you kept from your spend a navigate token that you keep on your ship. The Charger C70 again on the bottom, same loadout with reserve hangar decks and link turbo laser towers. And if I've got the points, I like Clone Captain Zach here because that can be tapped and that'll add a red dice. And then a lot of times what you want to do is you can concentrate fire. Once you get a good arc set up, you can concentrate fire. You can get 3 red dice out of the front with an LTT shot. And Clone Captain Zach, tap him, 3 red dice out of the side with an LTT shot. And now you're hitting for 3 and 3, with 3 rolls. And that's at red range. And since the card comes loaded up with 1 Confire token, you can then spend it, refresh it, shoot it again. I usually don't find myself needing it more than twice, but it significantly boosts the output of a C70. Even if you're just shooting out of the side, every once in a while, all you got's a side shot. Zach plus a Confire, you'll be rolling 4 red dice. That's a CR90, an Akbar CR90 would covet 4 red dice with a reroll on it, even without a TRC. So I think that's a pretty good build as well. I wanted to take a moment to speak about Clone Navigation Officer. He's faction locked 2 clones. He's not unique, so you can take more than one of him. And a lot of times against Dooku, which you can see his text here, getting through those raid tokens is kind of difficult, especially if you don't have time to basically throw away a couple turns worth of command dials. And so Clone Navigation Officers is kind of a way to get around that. A lot of times if I'm running 2 Acclamators, I'll Clone Navigation Officer on both of them, and they'll sling tokens back and forth to each other. And you kind of really have to think about your activation order so that you don't sling a token to a ship that's already got a token. But it's again, clones don't have ComSnet flotillas. So this is another way of getting the flexibility of being able to move tokens around without having to take a flotilla. I think that's actually the way you should look at this. If you think, I really wish I had tokens to be able to fuel my, abilities, like be it gunnery teams or ECM or whatever, but I don't have space to take a Radiant 7 ComSnet ship, or I don't have the points for it, I don't think I'm getting my value out of it, this Clone Navigation Officer is kind of like a ComSnet that's built into your officer slot. So I think using it or understanding how to use it is a big deal, and it's very useful for clones. And I would advise you to at least experiment with it and consider it, particularly early on in this wave, just because a lot of Separatist players are running Dooku, and he can be very frustrating. For the record, I do not think Dooku is good. I think he is a noob killer. I think he can be frustrating on people who are unprepared or not teched for him. But I think with an investment of 5 to 10 points or a battle plan that's tweaked only slightly, you can kind of neutralize Dooku. But for right now, he's kind of a problem, and clones don't have ways to get tokens moved around. And a lot of their ships need tokens to trigger their effects. Specifically, clone gunners needs a concentrate fire token, or gunnery teams can be triggered with a concentrate fire token. These guys can sling those back and forth and make sure that you have the tokens available to clear off raids that are preventing those from happening, and that makes it a lot easier to get your shots off. At the beginning of the video, I said that flying clones feels like trying to play a fleet that's built around Vic Star Destroyers and CR90s. Well, to take that analogy even farther, I think that flying clone squadrons is like trying to take rebel generics and mix them in with like TIE fighter aces, sort of. You got these speed 4 scatter aces that do a bunch of damage and have counter on them, and then you have a lot of generics that are predominantly speed 3 with escort, being the V19 Torrents, and then you've got the difference is that these clones have these Jedi supporting starfighters. These starfighters that benefit generics. You got Luminar, you can read her text. You got Kit Fisto, you can read his text. You got Ahsoka Tano. All of them are very good supporting units. Plo Koon obviously as well. So you'll probably see a large amount of generics, probably a couple V19 torrents to protect these relatively expensive Jedi that you're investing in, and then whatever else you want to build around. But you're probably going to try to buff them up with your Jedi. And so a lot of times I think the big issue is going to be that an enemy is going to try to burn through these torrents, and hopefully you can endure that and hit back with enough oomph to get through them. And your Jedi are kind of there to support and to land the killing blows on things and to go after targets that have braces and scatters, because they have a pretty big dice pool that re-rolls a lot of dice, very reliable, more reliable at producing accuracies and getting through those kinds of defensive mechanisms. Because of the slower speed of the generics and because of how expensive the Jedi are, you're probably not going to see the Jedi leap out in front and expose themselves against another equally formidable squadron wing, because they probably want the torrents to be near them to soak up that fire. Not saying it won't happen, but the games that I've played or seen, it seems that there's a lot of them all rolling together at speed 3, which is pretty typical. Just like a Biggs ball or a Jan and some X-wings of any kind. And you got, I think the Rockstar standout for clones is honestly Anakin Skywalker, because with his ability to basically to ignore engagement and still bomb, he's a very reliable two dice bomber that rerolls both those dice with Adept. He has bomber. I think he's probably your workhorse if you're trying to build into a bomber wing. I think a lot of clone fleets are either going to be heavy into squadrons because they have good squadrons, they're just slow, or they're going to be heavy right now into the double Acclamator gunnery team kind of Vic heavy, Vic 2 decap kind of esque build. And the main reason for that is just because that's all they have. That's all the components that they really have available to them. So if I was to try to give you some advice on playing with clones, clone squadrons in particular, I would look at if you're trying to bomb, take Anakin, and then take you a good number of V19 torrents. If you got some extra offensive retrofit slots, I would advise taking some reserve hangar decks just to make those V19 torrents feel oppressively hard to get rid of. If you take enough torrents, you probably want Naboo to be, because it increases their usefulness against ships a lot. They already have a 75% chance. You command them with Naboo to be, it jumps up to, I believe it's like a 93% chance of doing one hit for every squadron. So you push 4 of them, very likely to get 4 damage in one location. Very strong. So you're probably going to have, like I said, Anakin, some V19 torrents, and then a Jedi or 2 to flavor, depending on what you're trying to do. I've been running Ahsoka, but with Anakin, mostly because I think Ahsoka's ability to give somebody a 2 blue die shot is best on somebody who has Adept 2. So the things that have Adept 2 are Anakin Skywalker, Plo Koon, and Kit Fisto. So I think if you're going to take Ahsoka, pick somebody that's got Adept 2 on them, and take them as well. And a lot of times, to fill my bomber, to beef up my bombing, I'm taking Anakin. So that's my take on it. But Kit Fisto is good, and Plo Koon's good as well. The thing that I'm not seeing a lot of without hyperspace rings is the Arc 170s. The Arc 170s are great. They're just slow. They hit pretty hard. They have counter. They have 7 hull. So they're beefy. You just got to deliver them. And I think it remains to be seen how effective the hyperspace rings are. You can go back and watch my after action report when I played against Clone Trooper 5. in the clone tournament a couple weeks ago, and he used arc ring, the hyperspace rings. I don't think it was a massive. It changed a whole lot in our game because he could have, pushed them with flight control, fighter coordination teams. But I think there's a lot of value in these squadrons because 2 blue dice bomber, especially pushed off of Navuta B, 2 blue dice, re-rolling one of them, very strong, very reliable. And I think that going forward, good clone fleets will have a pretty significant reliance on squadrons because they don't turn well and they don't have good the acclamators don't turn well, and if they don't kill something in the initial pass, there's a good chance that whatever you maim but didn't kill is going to fly right past you and escape and then kind of nullify all your efforts. So having a good squadron contingent to run that ship down is very important. And that's my thoughts on clone squadrons. I think it is a squadron oriented faction. I think that will be its strength, and if you look at the Clone Wars tournament results from this previous event, most of them have been very heavily bomber, and the successful ones have been clone oriented. So I think competitively you'll see clones flying lots and lots of squadrons, and that's a good thing. That's their archetype. I want something that can, conceivably challenge Imperial air power. With Speed 3, they're not going to be the big alpha strike threat that Imperials are. They're going to be a lot like Rebels. They're going to have to kind of wade in there and take a hit before they can answer back. So you just kind of have to understand that. But I do think that they have the beef, they have the force multipliers in the Jedi that they need, and they have some really cool abilities and some very, very effective squad pushers in the Acclamator I. I think a lot of fleets going forward, even beyond Wave 0 for Grand Army of the Republic, will have an Acclamator tucked in the back pushing 4 squadrons and flying in the shadow of a Venator or whatever else comes out to kind of protect and give longevity to that squadron pushing Acclamator I. I really, really expect to see a flight controllers, boosted comms, expanded hangar bays, Acclamator I become a mainstay of the GAR fleet for a long time to come. To wrap up, some closing thoughts. If you're playing clones, you're probably taking at least 1 Acclamator at this point because you don't really, if you take all Charger C-70s, you're not going to really have any way of pushing squads. So and they don't have any rogues, so there's not a lot of combination there. So you could take, a lot of Chargers, and you could take Obi-Wan so that you can redirect and reduce damage, and that's all cool. But you're not going to have a lot of point unless you bought a bunch of Chargers. You're going to have a hard time filling your fleet out with just Chargers. So at some point, you're probably going to end up taking an Acclamator at least. And so I think what it comes down to is when you start looking at your fleet, how important is that Acclamator to what you're trying to do? Are you trying to really skirmish with the Charger C-70s and hang back with the Acclamator and push squads? If that's the case, you probably want to go towards Obi-Wan because Obi-Wan's going to help your Chargers, give them a little more survivability. And you're just going to have to really slow roll and be very meticulous with your Acclamator. Or are you trying to do a heavy reliance on squads and try to really, use your Acclamators offensively more as a centerpiece? And if that's the case, I would advise Bail Organa because all this kind of stems from the poor navigation chart of the Acclamator. It does not drive well. It does go to speed 3, which is kind of interesting and nice. Because when I feel like clones do a good job and are successful, it's typically because they delay until their slow-moving squadrons can get into a good position, and their Charger C-70s can encircle the enemy and set up good firing arcs. And then once that's been achieved, then the Acclamator moves in and all kind of engages at the same time. The C-70s are starting to fire off with their double arcing, very consistent damage, chipping into the enemy flagship. Squadrons are coming in and initially dealing with the enemy squadrons, and then hopefully peeling that off, those fighter screens off and bombing the enemy flagship. And then the Acclamator rolls in late as a finisher and hits with its its long range firepower, and then eventually and probably follows up in the following turn with a nice close range shot with external racks. That's the ideal game plan for a clone fleet in a lot of cases. And as that happens, if you can accelerate that acclamator, what often happens is you can bug out with the C-70s, and your squadrons hopefully have achieved air supremacy, so they're not going to give up a lot of points unless they are just so dedicated to bombing that they eat a lot of flak because they're put in a bad spot. And the acclamator starts to step on the gas and escape because it doesn't have any redundant tokens, and it has a lot of its shields are very front facing, and so it's not going to absorb a lot of firepower. They go down much faster than you think they do, and so as it's coming in, it's trying to hang back and then accelerate through the enemy fleet and escape. And for this reason, I think GAR fleets are very good, are best if they delay the engagement for a round or two and then start fighting on late 3, early 4. So if they can begin fighting on 4, kill a ship or 2, accelerate on 5, and then by 6 hit something and escape and be beyond the enemy, I think that's the ideal attack pattern for them, because you're preserving your acclamator, which is usually about 100 points fortress, and your C-70s, they're not they're 60 points at most. So if you can just win an air war, not lose a lot of C-70s, and get your acclamator out, you're going to win. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was informative and gave you some ideas for how to play Grand Army of the Republic. I think it's an interesting faction. I think it's a great blend of rebel squadrons and small ships and Imperial, basically Vicks. And I think it's kind of hard to play the acclamator. As we get better at that, I think it'll improve. I think there's some things here that will be faction defining going forward. I think you'll see, clone squad balls to continue to be strong, and I think the Acclamator I particularly has some legs. I think the Charger C-70 will be a staple of clone fleets for a long time to come, and I think in the meantime, until we get a bruiser, hopefully the Venator, I think the Acclamator II will be the mainstay battleship for the clone.